Let's talk about something that few people are willing to face head-on. The tests you must pass on the path to spiritual enlightenment. These aren't the kind of tests you can study for, and there's no cheat sheet. These tests strip you down to your very essence. They lay bare everything you think you know about yourself, about life, and about what it means to awaken. And if you're on this path, you'll have no choice but to face them. There's no way around it, only through. The first test you'll encounter is the test of letting go. Sounds simple, right? But think about it. How many things are you still holding on to that no longer serve you? It could be an identity, a belief, a relationship, or even a dream that once meant everything to you, but now feels like a weight. The path to spiritual enlightenment demands that you let go of what you think you are so that you can become what you should truly be. The path to spiritual enlightenment demands that you let go of what you truly are. It's a process of stripping away all the layers of conditioning, all the stories you've told yourself about who you should be, until nothing remains but your pure, unconditioned self. Here's the question. Are you ready to let go of the version of yourself that's holding you back? Because this is what makes the first test so difficult. We cling to the familiar, even when the familiar is a source of suffering. It's like being trapped in a burning house, but refusing to leave because it's the only home you've ever known. You have to be willing to walk through the flames of uncertainty, to step into the unknown without any guarantee of what lies on the other side.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound spiritual lesson.
As you begin to loosen your grip on old identities and attachments, you'll face the second test, the test of fear. Fear is the gatekeeper of spiritual growth. It's the force that tries to keep you small, to keep you safe within the confines of what you know. But here's the secret. Your fear is not here to stop you. It's here to guide you. Fear points directly to the very thing you need to face in order to grow. When you feel fear, it's like a flashing neon sign saying, this is where your work is, this is where you need to go. But how many of us let fear dictate our lives, keeping us from pursuing the things that truly matter to us? So, I ask you, what are you afraid of right now? Is it failure? Judgment? Losing control? The path to enlightenment requires that you face those fears head-on, not by fighting them, but by embracing them. You'll need to sit with your fear, to understand it, and to recognize that it's not a sign that something's gone wrong. It's a sign that you're on the brink of a breakthrough. As you move deeper, you'll encounter the third test, the test of solitude. True spiritual growth often requires periods of isolation where you're forced to confront yourself without the distractions of the outside world. This can be one of the hardest tests because it's in the silence that you come face to face with all the parts of yourself you've tried to avoid. The mind will scream for distraction, but the soul knows that solitude is where transformation happens. In solitude, you begin to hear the deeper whispers of your soul, the truths that have been buried beneath the noise of daily life. But solitude can also feel lonely, and that's where the challenge lies. Are you willing to sit with yourself, to be with yourself fully without needing anyone or anything to fill the space? Most people aren't. We fill our lives with noise, social media, relationships, work, because we're afraid of what we might find if we were to sit in the silence. But for those who are ready to pass this test, solitude becomes a sacred space where true wisdom is born. The fourth test you'll face is the test of patience. Spiritual growth doesn't happen on your timeline. You don't get to decide when your breakthrough will come, when the answers will reveal themselves, or when the universe will deliver what you've been asking for. This test is about surrendering to divine timing, trusting that everything is unfolding exactly as it should, even when it feels like nothing is happening. Patience is a test of faith. Can you trust the process, even when there's no visible progress? Can you continue to show up, to do the inner work, even when it feels like you're stuck in the same place? This is where many people give up because they want instant results. But the path to enlightenment is not about the destination. It's about the journey. It's about learning to be at peace in the present moment, knowing that everything you need is already within you. Ask yourself, are you willing to wait? Are you willing to trust that the universe's timing is perfect, even when it doesn't align with your own expectations? The fifth test is the test of ego. This is perhaps the most insidious of all the tests, because the ego is a master of disguise. It will trick you into thinking you've reached enlightenment, that you've transcended your limitations, even when you're still deeply rooted in egoic patterns. The ego wants to be right, to be in control, to be seen as special. And on the spiritual path, the ego can easily latch on to your progress, turning your awakening into something to be proud of, something to show off. But true spiritual enlightenment is the destruction of the ego. It's the realization that the self you've been so attached to is nothing more than a construct, a collection of thoughts and beliefs that you've mistaken for who you are. The test of ego asks you to surrender not just your fears and desires, but your very sense of self. It's about dissolving the boundaries between you and the rest of the universe, recognizing that you are not separate from anything or anyone. You are the universe experiencing itself in human form. So, I ask you, are you ready to let go of the need to be special? Are you ready to dissolve the illusion of separateness and merge with the infinite? The sixth test is the test of love, but not in the way most people think. This isn't about romantic love, or even the love you have for friends and family. This is about unconditional love. The kind of love that transcends personal attachment. It's about loving others without needing anything in return, loving yourself without judgment or criticism, and loving the world even when it feels chaotic and full of suffering. This test is about opening your heart fully, even when it's been broken. It's about seeing the divine in every being, every experience, and every moment. It's about recognizing that love is not something you give or receive. it's what you are. But to pass this test, you must first heal the wounds that have caused you to close your heart. You must be willing to forgive, to let go of resentment, and to love even those who have hurt you. The final test, the seventh, is the test of surrender. This is the ultimate test on the path to enlightenment because it requires the complete and total release of control. You must surrender to the flow of life, trusting that the universe knows exactly what it's doing. This test is about letting go of your plans, your expectations, and your need to control the outcome. It's about trusting that everything is happening for your highest good, even when it doesn't make sense. So, I ask you now, are you ready to surrender? Are you ready to let go of the need to control your life and trust in something greater than yourself? Let's dive deeper into the second of the 7 hardest tests, the test of fear. This one is crucial because fear is the invisible barrier that stands between you and the freedom you seek. Now, when we talk about fear, most people think of it in simple terms: fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of loss. But what if I told you that fear runs much deeper than that? It's not just about external circumstances or outcomes. Fear is woven into the very fabric of your existence. It's the thing that keeps you from fully stepping into your power, from embracing your true self, and ultimately from achieving spiritual enlightenment. So let me ask you a question. What are you truly afraid of? Not the surface level fears, but the ones that lie deep within, the ones that make you question your worth, your purpose, your place in the world. Because until you face these fears head on, they will continue to control you, often in ways you don't even realize. Most people live their entire lives guided by fear without ever acknowledging it. They make decisions based on what they think will keep them safe. Safe from criticism, safe from discomfort, safe from the unknown. But the path to enlightenment requires something radically different. It requires that you stop running from fear and instead turn toward it. You must be willing to meet your fear face to face and ask it what it's trying to teach you. Here's the thing. Fear is not your enemy. In fact, fear is one of your greatest teachers. It's like a compass pointing directly to the parts of yourself that need healing and growth. When you feel fear, it's a signal that you're about to enter new territory, that you're stepping into the unknown, and that's where most people get stuck. Instead of moving toward what scares them, they retreat. They stay in their comfort zones where everything feels familiar and safe, but also small and limiting. So I ask you again, what would your life look like if you stopped letting fear make your decisions? What if instead of avoiding the things that scare you, you leaned into them? You love the fear modifier. What it stands for is your spiritual growth. Let's get practical. One of the most effective ways to confront your fear is to sit with it. I mean, really sit with it. Most of us are experts at avoiding our fears. We distract ourselves with work, with relationships, with endless scrolling on our phones. But avoidance only gives fear more power. To pass the test of fear, you must be willing to sit in the discomfort, to feel the fear fully without trying to escape it. Imagine this: you're sitting in a quiet room and suddenly a deep fear rises to the surface. Maybe it's the fear of not being good enough, the fear of being alone, or the fear of failure. Your first instinct might be to push it away, to distract yourself or rationalize it. But instead, you do the opposite. You sit with the fear. You breathe into it. You let it wash over you. You allow it to be there without judgment, without labeling it as bad. And in doing so, you begin to realize something profound. The fear starts to lose its grip on you. It's not as overwhelming as you thought. It's just a sensation, like any other emotion, and it will pass if you allow it to. This practice of sitting with fear, of allowing it to be present without running from it, is one of the most powerful tools on the spiritual path. It's in these moments that you begin to reclaim your power. You realize that fear doesn't have to control you. You begin to see fear for what it really is, a doorway to your own liberation. But here's the deeper truth. The fear you feel is not just about external circumstances. It's rooted in something much deeper. At the core of every fear is the fear of death, the fear of losing yourself, of losing control, of dissolving into nothingness. This is what makes the test of fear so difficult, but also so transformative. To pass this test, you must confront the ultimate fear, the fear of ego death. The fear that the self you've built, the identity you've crafted, might not be as solid or permanent as you think. This is where the spiritual journey gets real. You start to realize that everything you've been afraid of, failure, rejection, loss, stems from the fear that you are not enough as you are. But here's the irony. It's only when you face this fear, when you allow yourself to feel the full weight of it, that you discover the truth. You are enough. You always have been. The self you've been so afraid of losing, the one that's tied to your achievements, your relationships, your reputation, that's not the real you. The real you is something much deeper, much more expansive. It's the part of you that can never be destroyed, no matter what happens in the external world. So, let's go deeper. What would it feel like to let go of the fear of losing yourself? What would it feel like to trust that who you really are is indestructible, eternal, and beyond all the fears that have been holding you back? As you begin to integrate this understanding, something shifts. You no longer see fear as an obstacle. You see it as a guide. Each time fear arises, it's an invitation to go deeper, to explore the parts of yourself that you've been avoiding, and to come out the other side with a greater sense of freedom. This is the key to passing the test of fear, recognizing that fear is not something to be conquered, but something to be embraced. And here's the final question I'll leave you with for this part. What if the very thing you're most afraid of is the key to your spiritual freedom? What if, by facing your fears head-on, you could unlock a level of peace, joy, and liberation that you've never known before? Let's talk about solitude. True, deep solitude. Not just being alone for a few hours, but the kind of solitude where you're stripped of all distractions, where the only thing left to face is yourself. This is the first and one of the hardest tests you must pass on the path to spiritual enlightenment. For many, the thought of being alone, truly alone, is transformative. It's transformative. Think about it for a moment. When was the last time you were truly alone with yourself? No phone, no social media, no noise. Just you, your thoughts, your feelings, and the vast emptiness of the silence. For most people, the answer is rarely, if ever. And that's because solitude forces you to confront parts of yourself that you've been avoiding for years. In the presence of others, we can wear masks. We can distract ourselves with conversation, with activities, with the external world. But in solitude, there's nowhere to hide. What makes this test so difficult is that when you're in true solitude, everything rises to the surface. All the thoughts, the emotions, the insecurities, the fears that you've been stuffing down, they come up, and they come up with force. It's uncomfortable, sometimes even painful. But here's the thing, this discomfort is where the magic happens. You see, solitude is the ultimate mirror. It reflects back to you everything that's going on inside. It shows you the patterns that have been running your life, the beliefs you've been holding on to, the wounds you've been carrying. And it does so without judgment, without criticism. It simply shows you the truth. And that's where the opportunity for true transformation lies. Most people avoid solitude because they don't want to face this truth. They fear what they might find if they sit in silence long enough. But what if I told you that the very thing you're afraid to face is the key to your enlightenment? What if the parts of yourself you've been running from are the parts that hold the greatest wisdom? Here's something to reflect on. What do you think would happen if you allowed yourself to fully embrace solitude, not just for a few minutes, but for hours, days, maybe even longer? What would you discover about yourself? What truths would be revealed? The path to enlightenment is in many ways a path of solitude. It's a journey inward, and no one else can walk it for you. In solitude, you learn to listen to your own inner voice, to the whispers of your soul. You begin to realize that the answers you've been seeking outside of yourself, in relationships, in material success, in the opinions of others, have always been within. But you can only access this wisdom when the noise of the external world fades away. So here's the challenge. Are you willing to sit in the silence long enough to hear your own truth? Are you willing to be with yourself fully and completely, without reaching for distractions or comfort? Because that's what this test demands. It demands that you sit with the discomfort, with the loneliness, with the silence, until you come to the realization that you are never truly alone. There's a paradox in solitude. At first, it feels isolating, like you've been cut off from the world. But the deeper you go into it, the more you begin to realize that solitude is not a state of being alone. It's a state of being whole. In solitude, you connect with the part of yourself that is infinite, that is connected to everything and everyone. You begin to understand that the separateness you felt all your life is an illusion, and that in your deepest aloneness, you are actually one with all of existence. This is why solitude is so essential on the spiritual path. It's in the silence that you remember who you really are. It's in the stillness that you reconnect with the divine essence within you. But this doesn't happen overnight. It takes time, it takes patience. It takes a willingness to sit with yourself, even when it feels uncomfortable, even when it feels like nothing is happening. So, let me ask you, what would it take for you to embrace solitude, not as something to be feared, but as something to be welcomed? What if, instead of running from the silence, you leaned into it? What if, instead of avoiding being alone, you saw it as an opportunity to dive deeper into your true self? Here's the thing. The people who pass this test, the ones who truly embrace solitude, come out the other side transformed. They emerge with a deeper sense of clarity, of peace, of knowing. They've faced themselves in a way that most people never do, and because of that, they've unlocked a level of wisdom and insight that can only be found in the quiet. But solitude isn't just about sitting in silence, it's about learning to be with yourself in every moment, whether you're alone or in a crowd. It's about cultivating an inner stillness that remains unshaken by the chaos of the external world. When you pass this test, you carry that stillness with you everywhere you go. You become anchored in your own being, no longer dependent on external validation or distraction. So, I'll ask you one more time. Are you ready to face yourself in solitude? Are you ready to sit in the silence long enough to hear the truth of who you are? Because once you do, everything changes. You begin to realize that all the answers you've been seeking have always been within you, and that realization is the key to true enlightenment. In the end, solitude is not something to be feared. It's a gift. It's an opportunity to reconnect with your true self, to remember your own divinity, and to experience the profound peace that comes from knowing that you are enough, just as you are. Now we arrive at one of the most subtle and challenging tests on the spiritual path, the test of ego. This test is not about overcoming fear, nor is it about embracing solitude. It's about dismantling the very structure of who you think you are. And this is why it's often the hardest test of all, because the ego is clever, elusive, and deeply ingrained in every aspect of your identity. Let me ask you this. Who are you? Seriously, pause for a moment and consider that question. Most people would respond with their name, their profession, their role in society, or their relationships. But are you really any of those things? If you strip them all away, what remains? The ego is the part of you that clings to labels, roles, and identities. It's the I that says, I am a successful person, or I am a failure, or I am better than others, or even I am unworthy. It's the part of you that constantly compares, judges, and seeks validation. The ego is always looking for ways to reinforce its sense of self, whether through praise, achievements, or even suffering. Yes, the ego can even latch onto suffering as a way to feel special or significant. But here's the truth. The ego is an illusion. It's not who you really are. On the path to spiritual enlightenment, the ego must be seen for what it is, a construct, a collection of thoughts and beliefs that you've mistaken for your true self. Passing this test means learning to dissolve the ego, to let go of the false sense of I and merge with the greater whole. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. How do I let go of the ego? It's not like you can just decide one day to stop identifying with your thoughts and desires. The ego is persistent. It's been with you your entire life, growing stronger with every experience, every success, every failure. But here's where the journey becomes transformative. The ego can be dismantled, but not through force. It can't be defeated in the traditional sense. You don't fight the ego, you transcend it. You outgrow it by becoming aware of its patterns and seeing them for what they are, just stories. So, let me ask you, can you see the stories your ego has been telling you? The stories about who you are, what you deserve, and how the world should work? These stories are often rooted in fear. Fear of not being enough, fear of being unworthy, fear of losing control. And of the ego uses them to keep you trapped in a limited version of yourself. But here's the remarkable thing. Once you start to observe the ego from a place of awareness, it begins to lose its power. It's like watching a play unfold on stage. You're no longer caught up in the drama of the story because you realize it's just a performance. The same is true with the ego. Once you recognize that it's just a collection of beliefs and patterns, you stop identifying with it so strongly. But beware. The ego is a master of disguise. It will try to convince you that you've achieved enlightenment, that you've transcended it. It will say, "Look at me. I'm so spiritual now. I've let go of my ego." And in that very moment, the ego is back in control, just in a new form. You see, even spiritual pride is an ego trap. The moment you think you've made it, the ego has slipped back in through the back door. So how do you pass this test? How do you truly dissolve the ego and step into the fullness of your being? First, you must cultivate awareness. Every time you catch yourself identifying with a thought, a label, or a desire, pause. Ask yourself, who is the one thinking this thought? Who is the one desiring this outcome? This simple act of self-inquiry can create a gap between you and the ego. In that gap, you begin to experience something profound. The awareness that is observing the ego is not the ego itself. Oh, it's something much deeper, much more expansive. It's your true self, your higher consciousness. This is the beginning of transcending the ego. It's not about destroying it, but about seeing through it. The ego will still exist. You'll still have thoughts, desires, and preferences, but you'll no longer be ruled by them. You'll no longer mistake them for who you are. Here's another question for you. What would your life look like if you stopped identifying with your ego? If you no longer needed validation from others? If you no longer sought control over outcomes? If you no longer compared yourself to those around you? What would that feel like? Can you imagine the freedom that would come with that level of detachment? This is what the spiritual path offers. It offers freedom from the prison of the ego, but you must be willing to let go of the false sense of self that the ego has created. And this can be terrifying because the ego has been your companion for so long. It's been the source of your identity, your sense of importance, your feeling of separateness. But as long as you cling to the ego, you'll remain trapped in a limited version of yourself. The final step in passing the test of ego is surrender. This is the ultimate act of letting go. It's the moment when you finally stop trying to control, when you release the need to be right, to be special, to be anything at all. In surrender, you allow yourself to merge with the flow of life, to dissolve into the oneness of existence. You become a vessel for something greater than your individual self. This is where true enlightenment lies, not in achievement, not in spiritual superiority, but in the humble realization that you are not separate from the universe. You are the universe. So, I ask you, can you surrender? Can you let go of the ego's need for control, for recognition, for validation? Can you trust that in losing your sense of self, you will actually find your true self, the one that is infinite, boundless, and connected to all of existence? Passing the test of ego is not about winning. It's about surrendering to the truth that you are so much more than the stories you've been telling yourself. And once you realize this, you step into a state of freedom, peace, and enlightenment that is beyond anything the ego could ever offer. This concludes our journey through the 7 hardest tests on the path to spiritual enlightenment. Each test, letting go, fear, solitude, patience, ego, love, and surrender, offers you a doorway to your highest self. The question is, are you willing to walk through?